Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Randiv coming to you with an interesting topic today on conversations on conscious change. We have had some amazing guests come in, but today in particular, we're going to be talking to a gentleman who I've had the pleasure of speaking to and interacting with, and I find him a load of fun. So I thought we're going to bring some fun into the podcast talking about change, conscious change, and how change can also have a whole lot of fun attached to it. Um, we've all heard of architects, and we all know what architects do. Just to jog our memories here, it's someone who is actually into designing, into developing, into concepts. And they take the concepts of what it is they design and actually inculcate it into a plan and a structure. And then we have these amazing buildings. But how many of you have actually heard of someone being called a destiny architect? Isn't that exciting? Isn't that something that we will all like to find out? Well, my guest today is a destiny architect. And to say something about him will be actually putting him into a box. So I'm going to actually invite him in onto the call and let us actually find out who this destiny architect is. My guest today is none other than Vidusha Nathavitharana, a Sri Lankan, a brilliant guy who I really adore. And now let us explore what this destiny architect is all about. Welcome to the call, Vidusha. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me. And I completely, I can't help laughing because every time we do talk, it's a hoot. So thank you very much for having me.
Today I'm going to be speaking to you on different things. Um, you are right now the most well recognized leadership trainer or facilitator, rather. And I'd like to know, were you always interested in suddenly leading people? What's your story? How did it all start, Vidusha?
All right. So, as with most things in my life, I think lots of people assume simply because they know me now that I'm one of these really planned out, everything is neatly packed up. Um, and I would execute it flawlessly. I swear that part of me came much later and not out of choice, but because you had to. And starting out on my own was never on the cards. It really wasn't. Two things, right? The first is that when I was working, I worked for a company called Courtaulds Clothing Lanka. Had a really, really awesome career. Was blessed to have some fantastic teammates who made life so much easier for me, and a boss that actually brought out the best in me. And everything was absolutely hunky dory. I was 24 when I was made assistant manager. I was 25 when I was made a manager. 26 when I became a senior manager, and life was good. I had just got married at the time. My daughter turned 1, and there was something that happened that got me to seriously introspect.
Okay.
Okay. Until then, my ambition, yes.
Okay, there's one thing, Vidusha. Now, to you've risen up the corporate ladder and relatively very fast, but I wanted to just question you on that. Yes, you could have had brilliant team members, you could have had amazing bosses, but what about you? Who were you being at
Well,
that time within the organization? What was your drive?
I think, well, the drive was pretty simple, Jennifer. I come from a, and if my mother is watching this, she'll cringe because she always tells me and corrects me whenever I open my mouth and say this right in public. So I was about to say that I came from a poor background, and my mother corrects me. We were never poor; we were middle class, and that's true. To be fair, that's true. But I was poor by my own volition in that I went to a pretty prestigious school. So in grade five, I switched schools and went to St. Thomas's, which was probably one of the best schools in the country. And it was a private school, and I got a scholarship to go through it. And because of that, I could afford the fees. And my parents were both working in the public sector, so they didn't make much. Um, they weren't poor, yes. By their standards, they weren't poor at all. But when you walk into a school like that, all of a sudden you realize that you're the only kid who's on the basketball tarmac that isn't wearing a Nike pair of shoes, and you do feel poor. Your father is one of the very few who don't actually roll up in a Mercedes or a BMW or a Audi or a Pajero, and you all of a sudden feel poor. So I think when I was about 10, 11, I felt poor, and I don't think that left me until I left school. And then I became really poor because I went to the UK on a scholarship again. And I thought all the savings that my parents had given me would last my entire duration at a campus. And it turned out it wasn't enough for even 3 months. So I used to work from so I used to work from 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning in a petrol garage. Go to school from about 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would take 2 semesters in one because I knew I couldn't suffer this for too long. And I would sleep for all of about 2 hours every day, Monday to Friday. I will sleep the whole of Saturday, and I'll study the whole of Sunday. That was my life during campus. There was nothing glamorous about it. And that made me feel really poor.
Yeah.
So the drive was pretty simple. I really did want to make sure that I was financially independent, and I make no bones about it. And I'm not ashamed of it either.
Definitely not.
And I wanted to make sure that I did something so spectacularly different that somebody would recognize me and make sure that um, they would. And becoming a manager was pretty simple, right? Because the only ambition that drove me, honestly, was to get a car, right? Because assistant managers and managers got a car and fuel, right? Which was a huge deal. So I wanted to become a manager as fast as possible because then I would have a car. Um, but when I became an assistant manager, I realized that they gave you a small car and not a big car. And then I wanted to be a manager because I wanted to have a bigger car.
Why not? Exactly. Why not? Yeah.
Um, so, so I think I just worked hard. Um, I do joke about this all the time, and I don't mean it in jest. I mean this very seriously. I was a very average student.
Hmm.
I sucked at mathematics. Science was a blur. I still can't remember anything of it. I was just glad it was over at O levels in grade 10. So I worked really hard just to make sure that I maintained grades because my scholarships were always attached to the grades I got. So I knew these two subjects were going to be god awful, and I didn't have any tuition outside of school. So I made sure that all the other subjects actually made up for the lack of it in math and science. And and they just got me into a certain work ethic. And I think in lots of ways I was a workaholic as well when I was very, very young. So I genuinely think I just worked harder than most people would.
Cool.
And one thing led to another. So but honestly, I think the pivotal point was the fact that there were people around me who were willing to kind of make sure that they supported my blind sides. I was very blessed that way because I could have made fundamental errors of judgment if not for my team. I had one friend in particular called Sajid, who I used to call my devil's advocate, who would always look out for all the risky things I would do. And then I had a colleague of mine called Bimsara, who was my sergeant at arms. Whatever I said, he was on board. And that was a wonderful mix to have. So whatever I did, I had the throttle in Bimsara and the brakes with Sajid. You can't go wrong with that. All I had to do was to shift gears.
Yeah, and it's nice to have people like that who have your back. Who
Absolutely.
actually call you for who you
Absolutely.
are and what is it that you're doing, and move you forward. So that's fantastic. So then you become this. How long did you work for
Well, so
organizations?
Well, I worked for nearly 7 years. Like I said, I had just, my daughter just turned one,
Mm.
and my dad turned up one day and asked me for 10,000 rupees. Now, my dad has never asked me for money, ever. So I genuinely thought he must be in some form of absolute,
Trouble.
you know, not even trouble. It has to be way beyond trouble for him to come and ask me for money.
Mm, mm,
And my dad is also one of those very private, very proud people. He would never ask his own son for money. So I asked him, what's going on? Did you kind of lose your money, or what happened? And he said, no, no, I didn't lose my money, but can I have 10,000 rupees? So what do you want it for? And he turned around and said, do I ask you questions when you ask me for money? Just give me the freaking money, right? So I wrote him a check and gave him 10,000 bucks. And when he was on his way, I actually called my mom up
mm.
and said, look, is everything okay with dad? And he's like, yeah, everything is fine. What's up? And I said, Appachi asked, Appachi means dad, asked me for 10,000 rupees. And my mother was as perplexed as me. I said, I don't know what that's about. You better ask your dad. Didn't you ask him? I said, I did, but he just doesn't answer me. So can you find out? He said, you know your father well enough. I'm not going to ask questions on your behalf. You better ask him. So anyway, 2 weeks later, we were at their place. And, my mom was messing around with Shakya. And I caught my father quietly in a corner and asked him, look, can you tell me what's going on? Because, I'm worried. He said, no, 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 nothing's wrong. So I said, but you don't ask me for money. You asked me for 10,000 rupees, which at the time was quite a bit. Put it in context, right? My salary was 35,000 rupees.
Mhm,
So this is nearly one third my salary. And,
mm,
it's a lot of money. And he wouldn't ask that. His last strong salary was 50,000 rupees. So he's
mm.
not going to ask me for 10,000 rupees. And he said, no, 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 I just realized that, you're working pretty long hours. You're working pretty hard. You don't seem to have the time to spend your money. So I thought I'll spend some of it for you.
Brilliant. What a hit underneath the belt, wouldn't you say? An amazing reminder of how it is just spending your time. Hmm. Good.
Yeah. And and I swear I actually sat down and I spoke to my wife and I asked her, look, do you honestly think I'm working too much? Because I didn't think so. You know, Again, put it into context, I was working Monday to Friday. My office was 1.5 hours away from where I lived. So that's 3 hours on the road. I used to work a 9 hour day, 10 hour day. That's 13 hours outside. Um, and on Saturdays and Sundays, I used to do lectures for the Chartered Institute of Marketing, which is pretty much 6 hours on Saturday, 6 hours on Sunday. So my wife is very sweet. She generally doesn't say anything, that would hurt me. But she did look straight in the face and literally told me, you know what? You work Monday to Friday. When you leave, Shakya is asleep. When you come back home, Shakya is asleep. And on Saturdays and Sundays, you give lectures. Well, don't you think you work too much? So I said, but I don't have much of a choice, isn't it? I mean, it's not as if though I do this because I want to. Robina decided to stay at home when Shakya was born. And she was very adamant about that. I was the sole breadwinner of the family, and I thought it was important for me to do this. And she said, well, you asked me a question. You don't need to justify it. I know why you do it. I just gave you an answer. So don't dig me on this. So I sat down that night. I don't drink often. I really don't. But I did pour myself a drink. I lit up a cigarette. And I actually introspected and asked myself, is this true? And does this matter? And I decided that night that I was going to give my resignation, give 1 year of a resignation period, because that gives enough time for somebody to be brought in and work things out. When I gave my resignation, my bosses thought that I was mucking around, as always. I was famous for, playing practical jokes on people. And they said, you know what, nobody gives 1 year of notice. I said, boss, look, take me seriously, please, for once. You know, I mean this, I really want to quit. So eventually, after 6 months, they took it seriously. We brought somebody in and, we looked at the transition and so on and so forth, said my goodbyes and left. And I swear I wasn't looking to start out on my own. I really wanted to take 6 months off, spend some time with the family, and find a job that probably gave me a better work-life balance, for a lack of a better word.
Mm, mm,
And what happened was, in between, a couple of friends called up. and said, look, you know what, Machang, we really love the work you did. Can you come and help us out here, help us out there? And one of the things that they wanted me to do was to run a leadership program. And that's how it started. It didn't start out because I wanted to start out on my own or because I wanted to do leadership training. In fact, I had no freaking idea about what leadership training was in the first place. All I knew was that there were certain things that you could do with people that opens people up to the possibilities that are in front of them that they might not be able to see for themselves. And I thought, if I can help people that way, that's fine. So I crafted this little program and ran it. And um, looking back at it, I think the program sucked. but, but somehow they seem to have liked it quite a lot. And one thing led to another. So that's how it started.
Yeah, this is something so interesting. Anyone of us who is into training or development, I have noticed this when I've interviewed quite a few people as part of the job that I did was at the beginning, we always think that what we are going to teach somebody or train somebody with or facilitate for somebody is not good enough. But one thing that we've got to actually look at in the way I have actually seen it within other people and myself as well is like whatever we're trying to help them to get, no matter where we are in whatever it is that we've been able to achieve, they have not yet had a glimpse of it. So for us to then judge
Sure.
ourselves that we are not good enough, because everyone has got capacities and abilities. That's the way I look at it. But especially when
Absolutely.
we as our facilitators and trainers, we look at everyone already having that, but they don't. So I guess that's what was going on for you.
Sure.
Um, so
Oh, absolutely.
hmm,
Absolutely. And I think again the real turning point of that was that when I actually went back to my client and said, I don't think that was good enough. And Jennifer, you nailed it. They actually looked at me sideways and said, what are you on about? I mean, the guys thought it was great. And I said, look, I mean this in all sincerity. I honestly think that we are going about this the wrong way.
hmm,
And that got a conversation started that lasted for nearly 2.5 years. And we tinkered with it, tinkered with it, tinkered with it, tinkered with it until what you see today evolved. And we're still tinkering with it, but I think the broad framework that we work with is solidified thanks to those conversations.
I think
So
are so
that's
important. Asking questions are so important.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
those are the kind of things that actually, as I keep saying, asking questions open up the doors of possibilities that we have never ever walked through before. And I think that
Oh,
is
for sure.
so true. So, Vidusha, you call yourself a destiny architect. Can you share with us what exactly does that mean to you, and how do you use that to actually shift and change constantly and morph and come out and create even greater than before? How does that work for you?
Well, before I called myself a destiny architect, I called myself a cheerleader first. So when we started High Five, we had to come up with titles. I generally have a knee-jerk reaction to formal titles. I really do think that
Join the club.
it yes, it somehow jars me. So I didn't want to put managing director. I really didn't. And managing director of what? I was a team of one. Right? Calling yourself managing director when you have 1,000 people working for you is a completely different equation. I was calling myself managing director of one.
One. You're
And that
managing
just
yourself.
didn't work for me. I, I I often tell people, you know what? If you really want to, if you really want to become CEO really fast, start your own business because then you're CEO, right? Management trainee, CEO 2 years later. Wow, what a trajectory, right? So I really didn't want to call myself CEO. I didn't want to call myself managing director, and I honestly asked myself, what is it that I want to do?
Hmm,
And that's when I kind of came up with the title of cheerleader,
hmm,
right? Because I honestly think that's what it was. I was leading the cheer for people on their behalf, and cheering them on. And then people used to fall over themselves by looking at my my business card, right? Because my name can also be pronounced Vidusha,
Hmm.
which is a girl. And cheerleader makes sense at that point, right? Not that there aren't male cheerleaders, of course there are, but in this part of the world, a male cheerleader doesn't necessarily come about. So whenever I used to turn up, they used to be constantly disappointed, right? Because they see a bloke and they were expecting a rather really good looking girl. And I turn up with my bald head, and you lose business that way. But anyway, so I was cheerleader for nearly 10 years. And then the business started growing, and we started um, growing one side of the business, which was focusing on training. So we have three sides to the business. We have a consulting arm, we have a training arm, and we have a research arm.
Hmm.
And somehow the training piece just started taking off, and we were getting into it more and more. And we had people who joined us, and the business grew. And then we started a completely different company under the High Five umbrella called Luminary Learning, which was to solely focus on training. Now, when that happened, I really thought to myself, look, I'm not cheerleading anymore. What am I doing now? And that's when the whole Destiny Architect came about.
But I'm going to
What
take you
does it
back.
mean to me?
But
Yes,
just going to take you back a little bit.
for
So
sure,
when you
for sure.
started off the company, I read somewhere that you started off with a very minimal amount of money, and
No money.
you had, quite honestly, you had no intention of starting off the company, and you had this little amount of money, and you said, okay, I'm going to just invest that. And people were coming to you from all over and saying, Vidusha, can you do this for me? Vidusha, can you do this for me? And you sat down with your lovely wife, Rowena, and had this conversation, said, and I think she is a very powerful woman behind you and has your back 24/7, who says to you, I think it's time.
Well, yes, there were two incidents that took place. One was that actually, um, technically speaking, Rovina owns the company.
Cool. Girl power.
Absolutely, and I swear I want it that way. It's a probably you're the only person who asked that question, so you're the only one who's getting this answer.
Yes.
Um, nobody else knows this. Everyone thinks I own the company. I don't. My team knows that I don't. But Rovina never wanted to kind of be the face of it. Neither did she want to ever detract, ever, until the kids were 18. And at that time, we only had one. So until she turned 18, she was absolutely clear that she was not going to venture out into anything else. That the kids came first. It
Wonderful.
was bad enough that I was working and such, that there was someone who had to make sure that she was home. And these were her exact words. Someone needs to be there when Shakya comes home from school.
Pretty much
Right?
like what
That was it.
pretty much like what your dad was, making sure that
Very
he was
much.
always at
So
home. Yeah. For you.
yes, so things kind of after 6 months, 9 months, she did sit me down and said, you know what, maybe you should start out on your own. And fate had it that 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later at most, I used to give my books, so to say, to an accountant, simply because I was on payee tax because I was employed. And when I changed, being solo or just a person, I wanted to make sure that taxes were paid and so on and so forth, and I had no idea about it. So I called up one of my friends who referred me to an accountant, and they're my accountant still. And they said, you know what, you really should start a company because you're getting income and you'll be taxed on your income, and it's a damn waste to do it that way. Start a company, and that way you can actually have a proper set of books. So I went back home and I told Rons, you know what? These guys are telling me to start a company as well. What's the chances of that happening after 2 weeks of having a conversation with you? So what do you say? And she's like, yeah, go for it. And we put 30 rupees each, 60 rupees. The registration of the company took us something like, I think, 8 or 10,000 rupees. I hadn't saved much. There was enough money to buy a laptop, and that was just about it. And she owns 51% of the shares. So she put 31 rupees, and I put 30 rupees, and she owns 51% of the shares, and I own 49% of the shares. So therefore, she's chairwoman or chairperson of the company. So
Right.
we actually printed when business grew, and we had a team. We all got business cards, and she never had one. So we all got together and said, we must give her a business card as well for the heck of it. And we just put it within inverted commas, the boss.
The boss.
So Ravina, we generally kind of, just highlight the first name
So
and
then she's
surname
the
comes.
boss and you're the destiny architect.
Yes, so she's the boss.
Hmm.
And the reason for Destiny Architect, and this is how I kind of look at it from my perspective, I genuinely think that most of the time, there are only three reasons why we go wrong in anything we do. The first is I think we haven't thought about it long and hard enough, and therefore it's not clearly formulated inside our minds. Then, when we do start, we don't have the resilience to see it through.
Hmm.
And thirdly, when we do make it, we lose our head,
Hmm. Quite true. Yeah.
right? So, if you can make sure that you're conscious of these three things, firstly, whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter what you're doing and what your ambition is, think it through. The human imagination and the human capacity to conceptualize is infinite.
Hmm.
And whatever starts out first inside your own head. So dwell deeply into it
Hmm.
and really map it out. Because that way, whenever you're doing something, all the next steps are very clearly laid out inside your own mind. Even if it is not on paper, it's in your own mind. You know exactly what to do. And that gives clarity and that gives focus. And then when things starts going wrong, you really do need to dig deep into your inner resilience
Hmm.
and have enough fortitude inside yourself to overcome all of that and just see it through. And sometimes that just means doing nothing and just weathering the storm, like we are doing in COVID.
Exactly.
And finally, when you do make it, you really do need to understand that you're not as important or you know as good or big or whatever as you think you are.
Hmm.
Lots of other people helped you, circumstances helped you, and of course you had your part to play in it. But don't get pig-headed about it
Totally.
and lose sight of more important things. And as long as you know these three things, I think whatever you do, I think you'll make a reasonable success of it.
That's
So that's what Destiny Architect is. So when you start out, it's my job to make sure that you can plan it out properly inside your own head and enable you to see the next
hmm.
steps ahead of you so that you're prepared well in advance. When things are taking place and when things are going wrong, it's my job to make sure that you see the other side of the
Hmm.
equation and why you need to have resilience and how you can find that resilience. And finally, once you've made it, if you do lose your head, it's part of my job to knock some sense into you at that point as well.
I love it. I love it. Totally. But tell me, Vidusha, and in all the leadership work that you've done and facilitated for companies and individuals, do you see that there's an openness for organizations to truly inculcate leadership within their teams? Do you feel that people are really wanting to have leaders within their company? How do you see that playing out? Are organizations really open to this?
Okay. So here's the thing, right? You know me to be not so politically correct. So I'm going to call it out as it is. I think every organization goes through a maturity curve.
Hmm.
When you start out, I don't think you ever want to even talk about training. They are so preoccupied with making sure that the numbers are making sense,
Hmm.
that the profits are coming in, the debts are paid,
Hmm.
and 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 business takes precedence over anything else, and that's fine. That's normal, I guess. But then when you reach a certain level of success, anyone who starts out a business understands that you can't do it by yourself.
Totally.
And then you start having the realization that you do need to have people in certain positions that are able to think for themselves, act for themselves, and act as if though it's their own business and do what is required, keeping the best interest of the organization at heart. That's, I think, the first starting point. But then, unfortunately, most organizations don't take that thought process far enough. for the realization that leaders don't necessarily come into organizations as leaders. None of us start that way. And I'm so blessed in many ways that most of my former bosses were enlightened people who understood this and that they facilitated certain initiatives, and they never called this leadership training at the time. That terminology didn't exist when I was working. But what they did without them even realizing was harnessing that potential. And that's what we miss. Now, unfortunately, leadership training is all the rave, right? Every organization is talking about it. Everybody wants to do it. But therein lies the problem, right? It's a fad. And it's not with true realization about what it is. So since everybody else is doing it, you don't want to be left behind. So you want to do a leadership training program as well, with the hope that people who pass through this actually become leaders. And it never works out that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always tell my clients, much to my own detriment, that if you can run a leadership training program and develop leaders inside the organizations, I swear we would be swarming with leaders right now. Because how many programs have been run in every country without actually producing the result that is required?
True.
So, and a fraction of those organizations actually get this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in that maturity curve where they understand, having gone through all of this, you know what? This training stuff doesn't work
Mm.
unless it's a process.
Exactly.
As an event, if you kind of keep these events and have wonderful lunches and five-star hotels and rah-rah kind of programs, and everybody comes out of it and then goes back to work the next day and asks, okay, you know what, now what do you do? Well, I don't know, because I have the knowledge, but I have no idea what I'm going to do next.
Intervention, exactly.
And then you go back to normal again.
Mm.
And what does that do? Well, it then unfortunately casts a shadow on the entire vocation of leadership facilitation. And people don't want to believe you anymore. So, but a few organizations have understood this and are willing to invest in processes, in initiatives, in interventions that are more long term, which are not just a flash in the pan. It's not a fad, it's not a program, it's a continuous process. And when that realization hits, and when they start working on that, that's when you see people transform into leadership positions, taking it up with grace, with poise,
Mm.
and with a certain amount of humility to understand that it's not about me. Because leadership isn't about you, it's
Absolutely.
about everyone else.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Which takes me to my next question. And do you believe that every individual has the capacity and the ability to be trained into becoming a leader?
Loaded question, Jennifer. Yes and no. Right. Yes, everyone has the potential. I genuinely believe this. I think every single human being, apart from, I mean, when I say this, I need to be careful because one time I remember saying this very passionately. Someone raised their hands in the audience and said, Vidush, I don't want to stop your flow, but tell me, Hitler. Do you think that that applies to Hitler as well? And I had to think quite fast and said, maybe there are a few exceptions. Maybe there are a few exceptions because
But
mass murdering psychopaths.
I would actually argue that it like, well, you get different kind of leaders in different kinds of situations. So if you have a leader
I know,
who's gonna kick your butt,
but
so
absolutely.
to that extent,
But I swear, I try not to use mass, psychopath, killer, and leader together. I try and differentiate the two as much as I possibly can. But honestly, right? I mean, I think the vast majority of people,
Hmm,
right? The vast majority of people have the ability to lead, has the potential to lead. And I don't mean whenever we talk about leadership, we do think about presidents and kings and people
mhm,
who've done fantastic things, right? I mean, but it doesn't have to be that. I think I think the starting point of any leadership journey starts at home.
Hmm.
We lead families, and I think it's important to lead families as much as you lead corporations and civic society.
Hmm.
It starts there, right? And even within those two or three people, there are times when you need to step up into leadership positions.
Hmm.
Um, my mom's dad died when she was about 10 years old.
Oh.
I often look to my grandmother as probably the most profound feminist that I have ever known.
Hmm.
She was a single mother, raised four children, two of whom went to university and did fabulously well academically, all of whom are financially independent, all of whom did really well in life. Um, she was just a teacher on a teacher's salary. Her husband was a teacher as well. So she got a pension of a teacher and the salary of a teacher. Raised four kids without ever asking for a penny from anyone else.
Wow.
Did that all by herself, right? And she lived up to be nearly 80 plus years old. And she was stubbornly and fiercely independent as a woman. She never, even when I was growing up, my mother would constantly fight with my grandmother, saying, you know what, you need to come and stay with us because you're now really old. So, but she would always walk to the market, bring her own groceries, would not allow anyone to lift a finger to help her. Said, look, I can sort this out by myself. And eventually, the two sisters got together and hounded her so much that she eventually decided to come and stay with us. And she said, look, under two conditions. Number one, I have my own entrance and I have my own pad. So we actually built a small section for her. And
Cool.
number two is that I pay rent for it. Whatever rent I was paying, I will pay you and you will shut up and take it.
Hmm.
Don't like it, I'm not here. And she did, right up until she died. Right. So I think we all have that capacity, and these are not people who are trained leadership. They just took it upon themselves. My husband died, what am I going to do? Well, I have four children. Let me do what needs to be done. And that's what leadership is, isn't it? It's
True.
doing what needs to be
True.
done.
Amazing. Yeah.
Simplest of terms. So I think all of us have that capacity within us. However, if you really want to train someone, and you know my little chink on training and learning facilitation, but let's not get into
That's going to be my
verbose
next
lengthy.
question. Not going to let you,
Okay, fine.
not going to pass
No,
that.
no, but let's not play on words, right? Let's just take it for what it's worth. If you want to build a leader, I think three things to four things need to come together. The first is and foremost is that you must want to lead. Wanting to be a manager like I was when I was 23, that's a whole different conversation. I
Hmm.
was very selfish. I wanted my car. I wanted my fancy salary. I wanted my fancy title. I wanted my corner office.
Yeah.
That
Cool.
was it.
That's
I
cool.
was not altruistic in any form. That's not being a leader. That's just wanting to be a manager and wanting the good life.
Yeah.
So you must want to be a leader.
Hmm.
And the first thing you need to realize if you really want to be a leader is that you must be willing to serve, right? And I don't mean this from a biblical sense or
Mhm.
from a scriptures kind of sense, but you must genuinely be willing to put yourself second. That much must be done.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you really can't lead. So that realization must happen. Only then can you be trained on it. Only then can you be developed on it. And only then will you be willing to receive what comes your way through it. Secondly, inside an organizational setting, especially, you need to be allowed to be given the space to grow into it.
Cool.
You can't just make a person a manager and expect him to lead from day one. It just doesn't work that way. It's a evolutionary process
Yeah.
which never stops in my mind. So you must be allowed to move into it gracefully, and you must be given that space for you to discover yourself and what you're good at and be able to help others through it. The third is when it matters the most, there must be people to tell you sometimes and very directly what is it that you're doing wrong in this.
Hmm.
And this is when the first point comes in very importantly, because if you're open to that suggestion, you will take it.
Exactly.
And feedback is critical in leadership development. And feedback is the very thing that leaders don't get because people start sucking up to them, right? Um, so, right?
I
So,
love the
so
way.
where are I going to get pointed feedback from, right? So unless you have people who are willing to give it to you straight, and unless you're willing to sit down, shut up, and listen to it, you don't grow.
Hmm,
And finally, once you've matured in that process,
hmm.
I think it's important then at that point for you to really have, formally or informally, a coach or several coaches.
Yes, exactly. You can't have
Because
one coach to cover everything. There have to be multiple amount of coaches or mentors to really help you to get out of your own way. Seriously, I truly
absolutely,
believe that. I mean, I was in my way
absolutely,
and I had to be given a swift kick in the butt to realize, oh my God, what am I doing over here? And I like what you're saying over there is there has to be a level of vulnerability for you to be open enough to truly receive feedback on what's not working and not take it personally.
absolutely.
Because
So
then
the
only,
answer is yes, you can actually develop people into being leaders, and damn good ones at that. But I think those four factors need to be factored in, especially inside organizations. If you're looking at developing leaders as a process,
hmm,
these four factors must be there. And unfortunately, we only look at it in bits and pieces. We don't look at it holistically. And therefore, unfortunately, leadership development generally becomes an event or a series of events at best.
hmm.
The dots don't connect. So when you're designing programs, when you're designing interventions, it must be done holistically. Otherwise, you really don't get the results you want.
That is a brilliant, brilliant takeaway there. Now, my favorite question, which I truly believe. And before I go on to the next question, I wanted to just add over here, and I want your views on that, Vidusha. So we talk about helping people to become leaders, but I have one question for you, and I'm asking that because I've experienced that within myself, and I'd like to have your take on it. Is is it important for people to learn how to lead themselves?
Totally. I think um, I'm trying to coin a phrase here, right?
Okay.
Without sounding hopeless. I think before you can lead anyone else, it's so damn bloody important that you can lead yourself in something.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be perfect in anything, right?
Point taken. Yeah.
If nothing else, if nothing else, you just need to absolutely, truthfully know who
Who
you
you
are,
are.
what's and all,
Exactly.
if nothing else. And if you can't do that much for yourself, good luck trying to lead somebody else.
Which is
There
very
was a
true.
wonderful article.
Hmm.
There was a wonderful article on the Harvard Business School that actually encapsulated this idea very, very well. And the article was titled, um, Why Should Anyone Be Led by You?
Cool.
Right?
Hmm.
Which was a fantastic read. And the title itself is so true, isn't it? You must be able to ask that question, why on earth would anyone, including your own children, want to be led by you? And I honestly thought about this really long and hard, right? And I think there are four reasons that anyone would be wanting to be led by you. Either you're a really nice bloke, so they just like you, right? which is nice. Sometimes when you're likable, you can get things done, right? You don't have to be competent in anything. You're just nice. You're just a nice bloke,
Likeable bloke.
truly warm, nice bloke. Yes, or girl for that matter. Doesn't matter. Secondly, you should be absolutely brilliant at something,
Hmm.
and then you can lead because you have the technical expertise to lead that particular initiative. You're brilliant at it, not good at it, not very good at it, just brilliant, right? You're just cut
Outstanding.
above everyone else. Yeah. The third is a combination of these two,
Hmm.
right? Which I think is the ideal place to be. If you're really good at something and you're also very likable, that's a very potent combination.
Is that
Very potent.
describing you by any chance? Because God knows.
No, I'm not. I'm probably the fourth one. I'm probably the fourth one, really. I'm not brilliant at anything, honestly. I wish I was. I clearly didn't get my father's genes or my mother's genes. Somehow that mutated at some point. And when the moment I stopped at these three, everyone looks at me to say, shit, I don't fall into any one of these. Now what do I do, right? And I tell them, don't worry, I am the fourth, which is you're averagely good at some things. You're very conscious of that, but you genuinely want to help someone else. Heart, hand on heart, genuinely want to help someone else. And if they go beyond you and above you, you have absolutely no qualms about it.
Now
Now,
that
those are
makes you
teachers,
a
isn't it?
brilliant leader when you can usher other
You
people to
would be.
become their best.
Absolutely. And you can't be insecure about it, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit like a teacher. You imagine teachers who taught us, right?
Yeah,
Most of us would do far better than they've ever done in their life.
exactly.
And they're truly happy when they see you, isn't it? They embrace you and say, you know what, oh my God, Vidusha, I'm seeing you after so long. I've seen your post, and they're truly happy for you. They're not jealous.
That's
They're
being stupid to be
truly deeply happy for you,
exactly.
you know. So all the three other categories, though, might be jealous.
Yeah, true.
You can have that,
Yeah, true.
right? Nice people can be jealous. Competent people can be jealous. Brilliant people can be jealous. The combination can be jealous. But there is a fourth kind who genuinely, I think, and I try to be that. It's not to say I haven't been jealous. I've been jealous, enough and more times in my life, of course. But I'm aware of that, and I can control that to a large extent. I swear, because I know I'm not brilliant at anything, right? And all my life, it's been abundantly clear that I'm not brilliant at anything. I've got so used to it that I'm very comfortable with it. So if somebody else is doing better than me, that's expected. It doesn't come as a shock.
My
It's
God.
just normal stuff. Right? It doesn't come as, oh my God, that guy is doing brilliantly well. You know what? He's a
What happened to
fantastic
me? Let's
trainer.
go into the
Yeah.
judgment of the story. Yeah, but I think
So
you are being extremely kind and kind. Maybe not the right word, but you're being very humble when you say this. But I think when you talk about being the fourth kind, it requires a certain amount of tenacity, capacity, ability, skills, and a level of amazing awareness and consciousness to also know this. It's not about other people, to also know this, that you are good at what you do. However, there's always room for improvement.
oh, absolutely. And Jennifer, um, and I don't mean this, I mean, you know me well enough, but for those of everyone who's listening in, right, I don't mean this lightly. And I'm not making a politically correct statement or wanting to sound nice in any form, right? I'm acutely aware of what I can and cannot do. But I mean this very, very seriously. I mean, take a look at just the people you know, right? Before I met Anton, I had written all of 3 books.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
It's not that I can't write, I can write, and I can write well. But I'm one of those people who get bored very easily.
mm.
So I write a book and I do not have the capacity, and my mother would berate me for this all her life, right? And say, you start lots of things and you never finish it. Okay. My house is about the only thing
That you finished
I that I finished.
in 7 years.
Right. Took 7 years. Only one I actually saw through. Right? I have fits and starts, fits and starts, fits and starts, right? So I would write a book, but I will be too bored to edit it.
Mm.
I would be too bored to revisit it. I would be too bored to do anything with it. Once I've done it, it fizzles out, and that's it. But Anton and I sat down one day, and I started writing, and I passed some chapters to him and said, you know what, do you want to collaborate? And he said, yeah, I have never written a book, but yeah, I would be happy to help. So we co-authored a few chapters, and it worked out fine. And when we asked ourselves, look, what do we do now? We said, well, we might as well publish it, right?
You have
Like,
25
yeah, but
books under your belt now, Vidusha.
yes, we have. We have, not me, but because lots of people helped in that process as well. But what I want to get at is this, right? So lots of people think I'm brilliant at what I do and I write, and that's honestly not true. And I mean this very sincerely. Those 25 books is a classic example of that. For 43 years of my life, I wrote all of 3 books, and only one of them actually got published. Okay, and after Anton joined the foray, he turned around and said, "You know what? You write really well. Um, why don't you kind of write more?" And I said, "Look, I can write, but I really can't be bothered putting all of these things together." And he said, "You know what? Leave that with me." And that's honestly all that happened. So I put a framework in to be able to write. And believe it or not, we write a book in a day, in one day, and you know this,
Mhm.
right? And I do the skeleton. I will write the concept. I will flesh it out, and I'll just pass it on to Anton. Now, Anton and Tatum in particular, Tatum is a complete finisher. If you take Belbin's team wheel, Belbin probably would have been thinking of Tatum when he coined the word complete finisher. Tatum is just that.
Mm.
Anton is somewhere in between. He's able to fill in the gaps.
Mm.
He's able to source things. He's a fantastic coordinator.
Mm.
And we have Ruante,
Mm.
one of my cousins, who's also part of Luminary, who's really good at proofreading.
Mm.
Right now, I will make tons of spelling errors, tons of it. That will get cleaned up by Ruante. Tatum will take over, laid out, and we have Zafran who actually does all the visual work. And within 24 hours to 48 hours, max, we'll have a book out. That's the reason we have 25 books. If it was left for me, there'd be bits and pieces of 50 books around there somewhere.
But this is brilliant. This is
Not just,
now this is what I call being the team. Being
absolutely,
the team. So
absolutely.
you have this amazing thing of conceptualizing. That's why you're the destiny
Yep,
architect, man. You see?
for sure. I
So
do.
that's
That I can do.
conceptualized, and then you have Anton on your team who's brilliant, and is such a caring person. I have to say, all hats off to him.
Absolutely.
And such an amazing mediator, a coordinator, a facilitator. He's really cool at that. And then you have Tatum, who's behind the scenes, who actually does all the things silently but brilliantly and elegantly. So it's so each one of you knows where it is that you are really good, and the other person comes and knows where to take over from there to create a greater. Now that there is engaging brilliantly as a team, and you do it
No,
flawlessly. All of
absolutely.
you.
And absolutely. And I often tell people brilliant architects are generally aesthetically beautiful buildings which are utterly impractical most of the time.
But then
You
you
do
have
need a good
engineers.
structural you you do need a good structural engineer or two. And also in order to make sure that inside the building looks as beautiful as outside.
Mm,
You know, someone who looks at the interior decor as well.
mhm.
And if you're wise, you will actually have the, which is what my wife is, an intensely practical person who turns around and says, you know what, the sink might look beautiful in there, but you can't open it from there. So for God's sake, move it.
So if you were to look at any organization as a building right now, brilliant example there. Do we have the right people in the right positions? That's number one.
Absolutely.
Do we have the
Absolutely.
right people doing the right jobs? Number two. Do we have people who are just going to look good within the organization, but are actually going to bring about some amazing change and shift things around? Brilliant, brilliant examples. Now, let's go to my favorite part. I believe this totally because the way that I have done training and have done facilitation, I have my point of view about what training facilitation is, but I'd love to hear how you differentiate the two. Please.
Okay. I knew you will get to this at some point.
I just love it. I
No,
love it
this
because
I
it
I
resonates.
must say this. Yeah, no, I must say this very, very respectfully for anyone who carries a title trainer. Okay, I do not mean any disrespect. I think trainers are fantastic people, and I myself have called myself a trainer for many, many years. And I changed it to learning facilitator very purposefully, simply because um, I wanted people to see the difference. So it's not a jibe at anyone or a profession. It's just to understand that it can be a lot more than what we see it for. Right? So the best way I can actually differentiate this, and I wrote this in one of our books as well. Um, See, a lecturer, when you're going for a lecture, I think most training mimic lecturing. So I'll start there.
True.
A lecturer generally talks to or at
At.
the
At.
student,
Mm,
and rightly so, because you're there to learn a curriculum
mm,
which you do not know anything about when you're a fresh student. Your teacher or your lecturer is probably someone who's dwelled in that subject for a decade or more.
mm,
So they clearly know more than you.
exactly.
You will shut up
And listen.
and listen and take notes and probably memorize it
Or
and
ask
answer the
questions.
questions that are in front of you.
I would never ever take anything like
That's
I would ask questions. So how does this apply?
that's right, right? But that's about all it happens, right? Now, for better or for worse, most of the training that we do aren't on things like nanotechnology
Yes.
or quantum physics.
Mm,
It's about everyday life. Management is something that we do every day.
mm,
We manage homes, we manage families, we manage our car, we manage our finances, right? So there are things that we already know. If you've lived, I think, for 20 plus years
mm,
and you haven't been killed so far, I think you know most of what I'm about to tell you
mm, mm,
instinctively.
mm. Correct.
Now, training is what we do in a lecture hall in that sense.
Yes.
And that's how the vocation is built. And again, no harm in that. However, I do think learning facilitation
Mm,
is understanding that I, as the person who's in front, is only one aspect to that process.
correct.
There are 30, 40 people in a typical training hall or a training room.
Right.
If each of them had just 2 years of experience, collectively, they know more than you because maximum years of experience you can have is about 40 years, right? 50 years at most.
Yeah.
So they collectively have more tacit knowledge inside that room than you.
Mm,
So first of all, if you're a learning facilitator, you will acknowledge that.
true.
And you will understand that facilitating that tacit knowledge and bringing that out will enhance the learning experience
True.
rather than taking away from it.
True.
Now, if you are doing that and if you understood that, how much will you speak? You will probably speak for no more than 20 minutes, right? And you will allow that tacit knowledge to come out for at least 40 minutes because they have twice as much as tacit knowledge than you. So that's one. The second is if you're facilitating learning, you're expecting people to go through that journey at their own pace and take it from that what they will, not what you want,
Truly. Correct.
right?
Yes.
So that way, each one of them is learning something that is truly internalized for themselves. And you must love that. You can't give a stand-up test paper after that and say, you know what, tell me what you know. Because it's not what you know that we are after.
It's what you've
It what's
externalized
that you that's right. And what of it that you can actually do.
and
And that takes a
externalized.
lot more time.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, right? And finally, and probably very, very critically, if you are facilitating learning, you will look at this outside of the classroom as well. And you will build in processes where they can test this out, find out whether it works for them. Because in certain contexts, you can have the best theory under the sun, the best tool under the sun. But in certain contexts, it doesn't work because every tool has limitations. And how can you teach that? You can't teach that. You can only experience that for yourself,
True.
right?
True.
So when you teach a tool and you tell, look, these are the contexts inside that classroom in a very limited space in a limited time, you can experiment with it a little. But then you must have a process where they go back to work or back to their families, try this out, and come back so much more enriched and have a much better discussion about it, a conversation about it. And get this, and this is where it matters the most, and that's the final point, which is if you're a learning facilitator, truly, you will learn from that experience as much as they learn from you.
True. Absolutely true. Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. Because it's not
So I
just,
think
yeah.
there is a fundamental difference between the two.
I mean, it's really appropriately put. The way I look at it is like training is usually how we spend time um, talking to people or at people, facilitating. The way that I have experienced it and the way that I'd like to do it is helping people to discover what they already know and
Absolutely.
giving it
And bring
back,
it to a level of
bring
consciousness.
it to the level of their own awareness and consciousness for them to be able to apply and reapply and to learn from that. And and,
Absolutely.
and I think I love when you said that because I've read that we are not trainers, we are facilitators. I said, touche. That's the way to actually truly be because I really love that. Vidusha, before
Can
we
I just quickly add one small other element to that?
go,
I think um, whenever we talk about training and learning, also, I tell people, you know, generally we teach tools, isn't it? And most of the things that we teach are through tools. Giving tools is fantastic, but enabling a person to be able to invent their own tools, I think that is the apex of what we do.
that
The
is spot on.
moment you can actually bring a person to understand this is what I need to do in order to create something that suits me, when you bring that person to that level, you don't need to teach them anymore. You don't need to facilitate learning for them anymore. That's on autopilot in there. And that I think is the most rewarding experience we have.
No, seriously, I think that's the coolest thing. So, Vidusha, I have a habit that I do or a process that I follow when I'm coming to the end of a podcast. And I would like to ask you today if there's anything that you would like to leave my audience with as a takeaway related to leadership and related to being your own leader. So,
Okay,
leadership and being
I'm
your
gonna
own leader, what advice would you give them?
I'm, I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna leave you with something that I often talk about. So if anyone who's listening to your podcast who has been through some of my training programs, it'll sound like a broken record. But but I do know there will be lots of people who haven't actually, seen me or even heard of me in any form. So I'll leave you with this because I think it really does sum up what I truly believe in. I think most of whatever I have learned that I truly believe in and I've truly internalized has been inspired by my parents and my grandparents. Um, since of late, my in-laws as well, because I think they're the coolest in-laws you can ever have. And then, of course, being a parent myself, because before I became a parent, I honestly used to tell my mother, I will bring up children very differently. And my mother used to kind of have a smirk on her face and said, you know what, I'll be alive when you do. Let me remind you at that point, right? And whatever I have learned in leadership or anything of that sense, or leading yourself, anything to do with the domain of leadership, I think can be beautifully summed up by three words that even you will relate to very, very, very well, simply because you've been through this journey as well in your own life. I think any good parent, we all try to be good parents. I think most of us do try to be good parents, but some do become really good parents, right? Any good parent have these three qualities, and I think any good leader have these three qualities as well. The first is love, right? Whatever your child is, however they're born, with whatever adequacies or inadequacies, you love them. If you do not have that fundamental principle, I don't think you're fit to be a parent. You can be biologically a parent, but you're not fit to be a parent, right? So you need to love unconditionally. You need to love, and that's just a given, right? Similarly, if you want to lead a team of people and you want to lead an organization, you want to lead anything, you must love the people that you're, occupying the space with, and you must also love that job. You must love being a parent as much as you love your child. You can't do one without the other. No?
True.
You can't love your child without loving the fact that you're a parent. You can't be saying, "Oh my God, I'm a parent. Oh my God, it's a bloody pain," and then love your child. It doesn't work that way.
True.
So first is love. Once you've crossed that threshold, comes responsibility.
Hmm.
We as parents are responsible for our children until the day we die. Now, that is not to say we mollycoddle them or, they make them over reliant on us or dependent on us. And none of that. But we are responsible. Whether they become CEOs or whether they're a beggar on the street, we are responsible for them.
Totally.
And at some point, we are responsible for who they become. And I honestly believe that. Right? We have to take ownership of that. We have to take responsibility for it. Same it is for an organization. Same it is with yourself. You need to be responsible. Right? And the final part is what to me differentiates a good parent from a great parent, which is sacrifice. If you really want to cross that threshold, you really need to be able to sacrifice. They will always come first, and you will always come last. If you're a great parent, you will always make sure that your children are fed first, and you will eat last. You will make sure that they're clothed first, and you will, clothe yourself last. You will make sure that they're educated first, and you will make sure that your higher education will come last. You will make sure that they're sent to school first, and you will go to your workplace last. You will make sure that their health is safeguarded even at the cost of yours. Their sanity is safeguarded even at the cost of yours.
You
The
just
same is true of
you
pet
you
leaders
just
as well.
you just reflected, helped me to reflect on exactly what it is you're saying has been my journey for a long time. So what you're saying is awesome.
Yep. So that's all you need to know. You need to
Mm,
love totally, unconditionally, and wholeheartedly.
mm.
You need to take full and absolute accountability and responsibility. And when it is required, you do need to make that sacrifice. If you do that, I think you'll lead yourself fine and you'll lead others fine too.
Cool. Wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Vidusha, the Destiny Architect at High Five Consulting and Luminary Learning. A humble gentleman, yet with a multitude and magnitude of knowledge, experience, and really hardcore, brilliant training, which he just brings to you in a way of facilitating you to truly get to know that you've got what it takes to be a brilliant leader. I am so pleased actually to be working with you and Anton and doing this stuff that we're doing together, ignite passion and deliver results. And let's see what we can generate and create to facilitate the amazing way that we can actually bring change to ourselves, to the planet, and to the people that we work with. So, thank you very much for spending an amazing time with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Uh,
Thank you. It always is. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care and have fun while we're having all these conversations. I think it's important that we have fun. Don't give up on the fun and smiling faces and crack jokes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Vidusha, thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much, Jennifer.
Thank you very much.
Good
And
night.
everyone, thank you for listening in. And if you haven't listened in, I really ask you to do this because this is going to be a game changer in the way that we bring leadership and training, essentially, how we facilitate that for you and have fun doing it too. So thank you very much, Vidusha. Take care and God bless.
Thank you.